In 1994, a Super Bowl ring vanished from a hotel room in Arizona, and what followed became one of the strangest police investigations in NFL history. The ring belonged to a Dallas Cowboys player who had just won the championship weeks earlier. When he reported it stolen, investigators discovered something bizarre. The security footage from that night had been erased. Not corrupted, not lost, deliberately erased. Three different camera angles covering the hallway outside his room, all wiped clean. The hotel insisted it was a technical malfunction, but the IT logs told a different story. Someone with administrative access had manually deleted the files between 2 and 3 a.m. The ring was never recovered, and the deletion was never explained. To this day, the case remains open, and that Super Bowl ring, worth over $30,000, is still missing. By the way, this would mean a lot if you hit that subscribe button. We're going to be posting a lot more of these deep dives. The 1978 AFC Championship game between the Houston Oilers and the Pittsburgh Steelers holds a secret that only came to light decades later. After the Steelers won and advanced to the Super Bowl, a former equipment manager revealed in a 2003 interview that he had been approached by an unknown man offering $50,000 to tamper with the Oilers' footballs before the game. He claimed he refused, but then admitted something even more disturbing. He said several other staff members had received similar offers, and he didn't know if anyone had accepted. The NFL investigated after the interview aired, but with 25 years past, there was no evidence to examine. Game balls from that era weren't preserved, and most of the staff had either retired or passed away. The league closed the case citing insufficient evidence, but the question lingered. Was one of the most important games of the 1970s compromised? In 2001, a referee's whistle was found broken in half on the field after a Monday night football game in Philadelphia. The whistle belonged to veteran official Bernie Kukar, but he swore he never dropped it, and it wasn't broken when he used it during the game. Equipment staff found it near the 30-yard line, snapped cleanly in two pieces, with no explanation for how it got there or who broke it. Stadium security reviewed footage, but saw nothing. Kukar himself said he had placed his backup whistle in his pocket after a particular call in the third quarter and didn't use his primary whistle again. Yet somehow, that primary whistle ended up on the field, broken 40 yards from where he was standing when the game ended. League officials dismissed it as a prank, but Kukar maintained until his retirement that something strange happened that night. The Fog Bowl of 1988 remains one of the most surreal games in NFL playoff history, but what most people don't know is what happened to the game film. The Chicago Bears faced the Philadelphia Eagles in a divisional playoff game at Soldier Field, and by the second half, thick fog had rolled in from Lake Michigan, making it nearly impossible to see. Players couldn't see the scoreboard, fans couldn't see the field, and even the TV cameras lost visibility. The game continued anyway, with the Bears winning in conditions that should have resulted in a postponement. But here's the mystery. The NFL Films Archive contains footage from the first half, but the second half footage is almost entirely missing. According to NFL Films, only 11 minutes of usable second half footage exists. The rest, they claim, was too obscured by fog to preserve. But former cameramen who worked that game have said in interviews that they captured far more than 11 minutes, and that visibility, while poor, was not as bad as the league suggested. Some believe the footage was intentionally buried because it showed just how dangerous and irresponsible it was to play in those conditions. In 1985, a Minnesota Vikings playbook was found in a Chicago garbage dump 3 days before the two teams were scheduled to play. A sanitation worker discovered it and, being a Bears fan, turned it over to local radio station. The station contacted the Bears, who claimed they had no knowledge of how a Vikings playbook ended up in a Chicago dump. The Vikings accused the Bears of stealing it, but the Bears pointed out that if they had stolen it, they wouldn't have left it in a public dump. The league investigated, but found no wrongdoing. The Vikings changed their signals and plays for that game and still lost. But the question remained, how did that playbook get there? Vikings staff insisted all copies were accounted for, Yet there it was, sitting in a trash heap 400 miles from Minnesota. On November 12, 1995, a Denver Broncos team flight was delayed for over 3 hours on the tarmac at Kansas City International Airport after a bomb threat was called in. The Broncos had just lost to the Chiefs and were preparing to fly home when authorities received an anonymous call claiming there was an explosive device on the plane. The aircraft was evacuated, bomb-sniffing dogs were brought in, and every bag and piece of equipment was searched. Nothing was found. The call was traced to a payphone inside the airport terminal, but no one was ever identified or arrested. The timing struck many as suspicious. The Broncos were in the middle of a playoff push, and the delay meant they arrived home at 4 a.m. instead of midnight, disrupting their preparation for the following week's game. Some players believed it was sabotage, but the FBI closed the investigation without finding a suspect. In 2003, during a Tampa Bay Buccaneers practice, a playbook disappeared from the coaching office and reappeared 2 days later with handwritten notes in the margins. The notes weren't in any coach's handwriting, and they appeared to be defensive adjustments specifically designed to counter Tampa's offensive schemes. Head coach John Gruden was furious and launched an internal investigation, but no one on the staff recognized the handwriting. The Buccaneers played the Carolina Panthers that Sunday, and Carolina's defense seemed unusually prepared for Tampa's play calls. The Panthers won in an upset. Gruden suspected espionage, but could never prove it. The playbook was locked away, and the team changed its entire offensive terminology for the rest of the season. The 1989 San Francisco earthquake interrupted the World Series, but it also interrupted an NFL investigation that has never been fully explained. The league was in the middle of investigating allegations of illegal payments to college players by NFL scouts when the earthquake hit the Bay Area. Several file cabinets containing documents related to the investigation were stored in a building that was severely damaged. When league officials went to retrieve the files, they discovered that the cabinets had been emptied. The documents were gone. Building security had no record of anyone accessing that floor during the chaos following the earthquake, but somehow the files vanished. The investigation was quietly dropped, and the league never publicly addressed what happened. In 1992, a Kansas City Chiefs linebacker named Derek Thomas recorded 7 sacks in a single game against the Seattle Seahawks. It's still one of the greatest individual performances in NFL history. But what's not widely known is that Thomas claimed in a radio interview years later that he knew Seattle's snap count before every play. He said someone had tipped him off, but he refused to name who. Reporters pressed him on it, but he laughed it off and never brought it up again. After his tragic death in 2000, former teammates were asked about the comment, and some admitted they had heard rumors that a Seahawks assistant coach had a gambling problem and may have been involved in fixing games. The league never investigated, and the story faded away. The 2006 AFC Championship game between the Indianapolis Colts and the New England Patriots is remembered for Peyton Manning's comeback, but there's a strange detail that's often overlooked. In the fourth quarter, with the Colts driving for the go-ahead score, the play clock malfunctioned 3 separate times, giving Indianapolis extra seconds to get plays off. The Patriots coaching staff was furious, arguing that the clock operator was favoring the home team. The league reviewed the incident and determined the malfunctions were accidental, caused by a software glitch. But a former stadium employee later claimed in an online forum that the clock operator had been told to give the Colts every advantage possible by someone in the Colts front office. The post was deleted within hours, and the employee never came forward publicly. In 1997, a Green Bay Packers team chaplain reported that several players had received threatening letters before Super Bowl 31. The letters, which were turned over to the FBI, contained detailed descriptions of where certain players lived and warned them to lose the game or else. The threats were taken seriously, and security was increased around the team hotel. The Packers won the Super Bowl anyway, and nothing happened. The FBI investigated but never identified who sent the letters. Packers officials downplayed the story, and it was barely mentioned in the media. But years later, a former FBI agent who worked the case said in an interview that the letters had been postmarked from Las Vegas and showed signs of being connected to organized crime. The agent also said the investigation was abruptly closed from higher up, and he was told to drop it. The 1981 NFC Championship game, known as the Catch, is one of the most iconic moments in football history. But there's a mystery surrounding what happened in the locker room before the game. Dallas Cowboys defensive coordinator Ernie Stoutner claimed that someone had tampered with the team's headset system, causing communication issues between the sideline and the coach's box. Stoutner said that at critical moments in the game, the headsets would cut out, making it impossible to relay defensive adjustments. The league tested the equipment after the game and found nothing wrong. But Stoutner insisted until his death that something had been done to sabotage the Cowboys. Some believe it was paranoia, others think it was a legitimate case of gamesmanship that was never proven. In 2004, a Baltimore Ravens team bus broke down on the way to a game in Cleveland. The bus had been inspected that morning and was deemed roadworthy. But halfway to the stadium, the engine died. Mechanics who examined it later said it appeared that sugar had been poured into the gas tank, which would cause exactly the kind of failure the bus experienced. The Ravens had to scramble to find alternate transportation, arriving at the stadium barely an hour before kickoff. They lost the game. An investigation was launched, but no one was ever charged. The bus company insisted it was mechanical failure, but the Ravens organization believed it was sabotage. The Super Bowl 36 halftime show in 2002 featured U2, but what most people don't remember is the power outage that occurred in one section of the Superdome during the performance. For nearly 2 minutes, an entire corner of the stadium went dark. Backup generators kicked in, and the show continued, but the outage was never explained. Some fans reported seeing sparks near an electrical panel just before the lights went out, but stadium officials said there was no evidence of foul play. The timing was odd, though. That section of the stadium housed luxury boxes where several high-profile figures, including rival team owners, were seated. Conspiracy theories swirled that someone was trying to send a message, but nothing was ever proven. In 1999, Jacksonville Jaguars quarterback Mark Brunell's helmet went missing minutes before a playoff game. Equipment staff tore apart the locker room looking for it, but it was nowhere to be found. Brunell had to use a backup helmet that didn't fit quite right, and he played poorly in the loss. The missing helmet was discovered 2 weeks later in a storage closet at the stadium, placed neatly on a shelf where it clearly hadn't been overlooked. Someone had taken it and then returned it after the game. Security footage from that area of the stadium had mysteriously been recorded over, so there was no way to identify who had access. Brunell said in interviews that he believed someone on the stadium staff had sabotaged him, but he could never prove it. The 1972 Immaculate Reception is one of the most debated plays in NFL history, but there's another mystery tied to that game. After the Oakland Raiders lost to the Pittsburgh Steelers on Franco Harris's miraculous catch, Raiders owner Al Davis claimed that the referees had been bribed. He never provided evidence, but he insisted for the rest of his life that the game had been fixed. He pointed to several questionable calls throughout the game and said that the league wanted the Steelers to advance because they were a more marketable team. The league dismissed his claims as sour grapes, but Davis was so convinced that he commissioned a private investigation. The results of that investigation were never made public, and the report, if it ever existed, has never been found. In 2010, a New York Jets equipment manager noticed that several practice jerseys had been cut with scissors. The cuts were clean and deliberate, not the result of wear and tear. The jerseys belonged to key offensive players, and the cuts were located in areas that would make them unusable. The manager reported it to team security, but no one came forward, and there were no leads. The Jets installed additional security cameras in the equipment room. But the culprit was never caught. Some players believed it was an inside job, someone on the staff who had a grudge. Others thought it was a prank that went too far. Either way, it remains unsolved. The mysterious case of the disappearing game ball from Super Bowl 38 has puzzled collectors and NFL historians for years. After the New England Patriots defeated the Carolina Panthers, the game ball that Tom Brady threw for the winning touchdown was supposed to be preserved and sent to the Hall of Fame. But when officials went to retrieve it, the ball was gone. A substitute ball was sent to the Hall of Fame, but authenticators later determined it wasn't the actual game ball. The real ball has never been found. Some believe a staff member stole it to sell on the black market. Others think it was accidentally thrown into the regular ball rotation and lost. The NFL has never publicly commented on the missing ball. In 1987, during the players' strike, several replacement games were played with non-union players. One of those games, between the Washington Redskins and the St. Louis Cardinals, ended in controversy when the official game tape went missing from the NFL's archives. The tape contained footage of a disputed touchdown call that may have changed the outcome. Without the tape, there was no way to review the play, and the results stood. Decades later, a former league employee claimed the tape had been intentionally destroyed because it showed clear evidence that the referees had blown the call. The employee said he was ordered to dispose of the tape by a superior, but he refused to name who gave the order. In 2008, a Detroit Lions wide receiver claimed his phone had been hacked and that someone had accessed his text messages with coaches. The messages contained play calls and route adjustments, information that would be valuable to an opposing team. The Lions played the Minnesota Vikings the following week, and the Vikings defense seemed to know exactly what plays were coming. The Lions lost badly. An investigation was launched, but the hacker was never identified. The receiver changed his phone number and increased his security, but the damage was done. Some within the organization suspected the Vikings had paid someone to hack the phone, but there was no proof. The strange case of the 1983 Los Angeles Raiders involves a missing team charter flight. The Raiders were scheduled to fly from Los Angeles to Seattle for a game. But when players and coaches arrived at the airport, they discovered their plane had been rerouted to a different airport 50 miles away. The airline claimed it was a miscommunication, but the Raiders suspected foul play. By the time the team got to the correct airport and boarded a replacement flight, they had lost nearly 4 hours. They arrived in Seattle exhausted and unprepared, losing the game. Raiders owner Al Davis accused the airline of being paid off by the Seahawks, but the airline denied it, and no evidence was ever found. In 1996, a Buffalo Bills offensive lineman reported that someone had been entering his hotel room during road trips and going through his playbook. He said he started setting small traps, like placing a hair across the pages, and each time he returned to his room, the hair had been moved. He reported it to team security, who staked out his room on the next road trip. They caught a hotel housekeeper entering the room and photographing pages of the playbook with a camera. The housekeeper was arrested, but she refused to say who she was working for. She was charged with trespassing, but released after posting bail. She disappeared before her court date and was never seen again. The 2002 playoff game between the Oakland Raiders and the New England Patriots, known as the Tuck Rule game, is infamous for the controversial call that changed the outcome. But there's a lesser-known mystery tied to that game. After the Patriots won, a Raiders fan found a piece of paper in the parking lot outside the stadium. The paper appeared to be a handwritten note with instructions on how to rule on a fumble recovery. The note was turned over to the media, and some believed it was evidence that the referees had been instructed to favor the Patriots. The NFL said the note was a fake, created by a disgruntled fan, and dismissed it. But handwriting analysts hired by a Bay Area newspaper said the note appeared authentic, and the paper had been torn from an official NFL notebook. The story was buried, and the note disappeared. In 1991, a San Francisco 49ers defensive playbook was mailed anonymously to the New York Giants 1 week before the two teams met in the playoffs. The Giants claimed they immediately turned it over to the league, but the 49ers didn't believe them. San Francisco lost the game, and their head coach, George Seifert, accused the Giants of using the stolen playbook to prepare. The league investigated but found no evidence that the Giants had opened the package before turning it over. However, some Giants players later admitted in interviews that they had seen pages from a 49ers playbook during film study that week, suggesting someone on the coaching staff had made copies before handing it to the league. The 2013 Thanksgiving game between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Baltimore Ravens featured one of the strangest equipment failures in NFL history. Steelers quarterback Ben Roethlisberger's helmet radio stopped working in the fourth quarter, making it impossible for him to hear play calls from the sideline. Backup communication methods failed as well, and the Steelers had to use hand signals. They lost the game. After the game, league officials examined the helmet and found that the radio transmitter had been disabled. It wasn't a malfunction, it had been deliberately turned off. The league said it was an accident caused by a technician, but the Steelers didn't buy it. They filed a formal complaint, but the league dismissed it, and the technician was never identified. In 1984, the Miami Dolphins were preparing for a playoff game against the Seattle Seahawks when their game plan mysteriously disappeared from the team hotel. Coaches had left the binder in a conference room overnight, and when they returned the next morning, it was gone. Security footage showed someone entering the room wearing a hotel uniform, but their face was obscured by a hat. The Dolphins had to recreate the game plan from memory, and they lost the game. The binder was never recovered, and the hotel employee was never identified. Dolphins head coach Don Shula believed the Seahawks were behind it, but he could never prove it. The 2005 Indianapolis Colts were accused of pumping artificial crowd noise into the RCA Dome during home games. Opposing teams complained that the noise levels were unnaturally loud, making it impossible for offenses to communicate. The league investigated and found no evidence of artificial noise, but they did discover that the Colts had modified the stadium's acoustics in ways that amplified crowd sound. The league ruled it was legal, but many teams believed the Colts were cheating. Some players claimed they had heard recordings of crowd noise being played over the stadium speakers, but no one could provide proof. In 1998, a Green Bay Packers team doctor reported that several players' medical files had been accessed without authorization. The files contained sensitive information about injuries and treatment plans. The doctor suspected corporate espionage, believing a rival team was trying to gain an advantage by knowing which Packers players were injured. The team's IT department traced the breach to an IP address in Chicago, home of the Bears. But when investigators followed up, they hit a dead end. The IP address belonged to a public library, and there was no way to determine who had used the computer. The 2009 Minnesota Vikings were involved in a strange incident during a game against the Green Bay Packers. Late in the game, with the Vikings driving for a potential game-winning touchdown, several players reported hearing a loud, high-pitched frequency through their helmet radios. The sound was so piercing that it disoriented them, and they had to call a timeout. By the time play resumed, the sound had stopped, but the Vikings had lost their momentum and failed to score. The league investigated and determined it was radio interference from an unknown source. But Vikings players believed someone in the stadium had deliberately transmitted the frequency to disrupt them. In 1993, the Dallas Cowboys were accused of bugging the visiting team's locker room at Texas Stadium. Several teams reported that their game plans seemed to be known by the Cowboys' defense before they even ran the plays. The allegations were never proven, but the league quietly swept the locker room for listening devices and found nothing. However, a former Cowboys staff member later claimed in a tell-all book that owner Jerry Jones had installed recording devices in the visiting locker room but had them removed before the league's inspection. The Cowboys denied the allegations, and no legal action was ever taken. The 2011 NFC Championship game between the San Francisco 49ers and the New York Giants ended with a fumble by 49ers return man Kyle Williams that sealed the Giants' victory. But what's not widely known is that Williams claimed after the game that his helmet had been tampered with. He said the chin strap felt loose, and he believed someone had adjusted it before the game. Equipment staff examined the helmet and found that the strap had indeed been loosened, but they couldn't determine when or how it happened. Williams was ridiculed for making excuses, and the story was dismissed. But some 49ers staff members believed something suspicious had occurred. In 1986, the Chicago Bears were undefeated and heading into a Monday Night Football game against the Miami Dolphins when several players reported receiving strange phone calls at their hotel. The calls came in the middle of the night, waking the players and disrupting their sleep. The calls were traced to payphones in the Miami area, but no one was ever identified. The Bears lost the game, ending their undefeated season. Some players believed it was a coordinated effort to sabotage them, while others thought it was just overzealous fans. Either way, it remains one of the stranger incidents in Bears history. The 2016 Super Bowl between the Denver Broncos and the Carolina Panthers featured a controversial moment that has never been fully explained. During the halftime show, several Broncos players reported that their Gatorade coolers had been tampered with. They claimed the drinks tasted strange, and some players felt nauseous after drinking them. The league tested the remaining Gatorade and found no evidence of tampering, but the Broncos insisted something was wrong. Carolina denied any involvement, and the incident was quickly forgotten. But some Broncos players still believed their drinks were spiked. In 1979, the Pittsburgh Steelers were accused of deflating footballs before a playoff game against the Houston Oilers. Oilers defensive linemen claimed the balls felt softer than regulation, making them easier for Steelers quarterback Terry Bradshaw to grip and throw. The referee tested the balls at halftime and found they were within the acceptable range, but some were on the lower end. The league dismissed the complaints, and the Steelers won the game. Decades later, Deflategate would bring similar accusations against the Patriots, but the Steelers' alleged deflation was never revisited. In 2007, a Cincinnati Bengals linebacker claimed he had been offered money to intentionally injure an opposing team's quarterback. He reported the offer to the league, which launched an investigation. The player refused to name who made the offer, citing fear of retaliation. The investigation went nowhere, and the player was later cut from the team. Some believe he was released for speaking out, while others think his story was fabricated. Either way, the league closed the case without finding any evidence of wrongdoing. The 1994 NFC Championship game between the Dallas Cowboys and the San Francisco 49ers is remembered for the 49ers' dominant victory, but there's a strange detail that's often overlooked. Cowboys players reported that the field at Candlestick Park was unusually slippery, and several of them lost their footing during the game. After the game, equipment staff examined the field and found traces of a substance that appeared to be oil or grease. The 49ers denied any wrongdoing, and the league said the substance was residue from a pre-game ceremony. But Cowboys players believed the field had been intentionally sabotaged. In 2000, the St. Louis Rams were accused of using illegal communication devices during games. Opposing teams claimed that Rams quarterback Kurt Warner seemed to know defensive coverages before the snap, suggesting he was receiving real-time information from the sideline beyond what was allowed. The league investigated but found no evidence of illegal devices. However, some teams continued to believe the Rams had found a way to circumvent the rules. The accusations faded after the Rams dynasty ended, but they remain a footnote in the team's history. The mysterious disappearance of Len Bias's NFL scouting report has puzzled analysts for decades. Bias, a college basketball star who died of a cocaine overdose in 1986, was also considered a potential NFL prospect due to his athleticism. Several NFL teams had reportedly scouted him as a tight end or defensive end, and detailed reports were compiled. But after his death, those reports vanished from team archives. Some believe the reports were destroyed out of respect, while others think they were removed to avoid controversy. Either way, no copies have ever surfaced. In 1988, a Philadelphia Eagles equipment manager discovered that several players' cleats had been tampered with before a game. The screws holding the cleats in place had been loosened, which could have caused serious injuries if players had worn them. The tampering was discovered during a routine check, and the cleats were replaced. An investigation was launched, but no one was ever charged. The Eagles believed it was an inside job, possibly by a disgruntled staff member, but the culprit was never identified. The 2014 Seattle Seahawks were accused of using performance-enhancing drugs after several players tested positive. But what's not widely known is that the team claimed their supplements had been contaminated by a third-party manufacturer. The league investigated and found evidence supporting the Seahawks' claim, but some teams believed it was a cover-up. The manufacturer was never publicly identified, and the contaminated supplements were never produced as evidence. The Seahawks were fined, but many believe they got off easy. In 1982, a Washington Redskins assistant coach was caught trying to sneak into the opposing team's hotel the night before a playoff game. He was arrested for trespassing, but he claimed he was just looking for a friend. The Redskins denied he was there to spy, and the charges were dropped. However, the opposing team, the Detroit Lions, believed he was trying to steal their game plan. The incident created tension between the two teams, and it remains one of the stranger stories from that era. In 2012, a New Orleans Saints defensive coordinator was accused of sending text messages to players encouraging them to injure opponents. The messages were part of the Bountygate scandal, but some of the texts were never made public. The league claimed they were too inflammatory to release, but reporters who saw them said they contained explicit instructions on how to target specific players. The texts were sealed as part of a legal settlement, and they remain hidden to this day. The 1976 Oakland Raiders were accused of using stickum, a sticky substance that players applied to their hands to help catch the ball. While stickum was legal at the time, the Raiders were accused of using an excessive amount, giving them an unfair advantage. The league eventually banned stickum in 1981, but the Raiders' use of it during their championship run remains controversial. Some players from that era admit they used it, while others deny it made a significant difference. In 2003, a Tampa Bay Buccaneers cheerleader reported that someone had been taking photos of the cheerleaders without their consent. The photos were later found posted on an internet forum, and the cheerleader filed a police report. The investigation revealed that the photos had been taken by someone with field access, but the photographer was never identified. The Buccaneers increased security around the cheerleading squad, but the incident raised concerns about privacy and safety. The 2008 New England Patriots were embroiled in the Spygate scandal, but there's a lesser-known aspect of the story that's often forgotten. After the initial videotaping incident was exposed, several other teams came forward claiming the Patriots had spied on them as well. The league investigated but never released the full findings. Some believe the NFL buried the evidence to protect the Patriots' legacy, while others think the allegations were exaggerated. Either way, the full truth of Spygate has never been revealed. In 1990, a Los Angeles Rams quarterback claimed his car had been broken into and his playbook stolen. He reported it to police, but the playbook was never recovered. The Rams played the San Francisco 49ers the following week, and the 49ers defense seemed to know every play before it happened. The Rams lost badly, and their quarterback was convinced the 49ers had obtained his playbook. The 49ers denied it, and the league never investigated, but the quarterback maintained until his retirement that his playbook had been stolen and used against him. The 2015 Carolina Panthers were accused of tampering with the footballs during the NFC Championship game. Patriots fans claimed the balls used by Carolina quarterback Cam Newton appeared overinflated, giving him an advantage. The league tested the balls after the game and found they were within the acceptable range. But the accusations persisted, and some Patriots fans believed the Panthers had gotten away with cheating. The league dismissed the claims, and the Panthers went on to the Super Bowl. In 1983, a Miami Dolphins team doctor reported that several vials of medication had gone missing from the team's medical supply. The vials contained painkillers and anti-inflammatory drugs, substances that could be abused by players. An investigation was launched, but the vials were never found. Some suspected a player had stolen them, while others believed a staff member was involved. The incident was kept quiet, and the team increased security around the medical supplies. The 2006 Chicago Bears were accused of using an illegal formation during a playoff game. Opposing coaches claimed the Bears had lined up in a way that gave them an unfair advantage, but the referees didn't call a penalty. After the game, the league reviewed the play and admitted the Bears had indeed used an illegal formation, but they said it had no impact on the outcome. The Bears' opponent disagreed, and the controversy lingered for weeks. But the result stood, and the Bears advanced. In 1995, a Kansas City Chiefs punter claimed someone had deflated the footballs he was using during practice. He said the balls felt soft and didn't travel as far as they should have. Equipment staff tested the balls and found they were indeed underinflated. An investigation was launched, but no one admitted to deflating them. Some players joked that it was a prank, while others suspected sabotage. The incident was never solved, and the punter had to use different balls for the rest of the season. The 2017 Atlanta Falcons collapse in Super Bowl 51 has been analyzed from every angle, but there's one mystery that remains. Several Falcons players claimed after the game that their communication devices malfunctioned in the fourth quarter, making it difficult to hear play calls. The league tested the devices and found no issues, but the players insisted something was wrong. Some conspiracy theorists believe the Patriots somehow interfered with the Falcons' communications, but there's no evidence to support that claim. The Falcons' collapse remains one of the most shocking in NFL history, and the communication issues, if they occurred, only add to the mystery. In 1989, a Buffalo Bills equipment manager reported that someone had been going through the team's equipment bags during road trips. Items had been moved around, and some small pieces of equipment were missing. The manager set up a hidden camera and caught a hotel employee rifling through the bags. The employee was arrested, but he claimed he was just curious and wasn't working for anyone. The Bills didn't believe him, and they suspected he was spying for an opposing team. The employee pleaded guilty to trespassing and was fined, but he never revealed if anyone had paid him. The 2010 Minnesota Vikings faced the New Orleans Saints in the NFC Championship game, and the game was marred by allegations of dirty play. Vikings players claimed the Saints had deliberately tried to injure quarterback Brett Favre, hitting him low and high throughout the game. The hits were later cited as part of the Bountygate scandal, but at the time, the league took no action. Vikings fans believed the game was stolen from them, and the controversy over the Saints' tactics has never fully died down. Some believe the outcome would have been different if the league had intervened during the game. In 1987, a Denver Broncos linebacker claimed he had been approached by a gambler who offered him money to play poorly in an upcoming game. The linebacker reported the offer to the league, which launched an investigation. The gambler was never identified, and the investigation was quietly closed. The linebacker was praised for his integrity, but some wondered if other players had received similar offers and hadn't reported them. The incident highlighted the ongoing threat of gambling corruption in professional sports. The 2004 New England Patriots were accused of filming the St. Louis Rams walkthrough before Super Bowl 36. The allegation, which surfaced years after the game, claimed that a Patriots employee had secretly recorded the Rams' practice. The league investigated and found no evidence that the walkthrough had been filmed. The Boston Herald, which originally reported the story, later issued a retraction and apology, but the damage was done, and many Rams fans still believe the Patriots cheated their way to victory. The truth of what happened that day remains disputed. In 1992, a Green Bay Packers wide receiver claimed his phone line had been tapped. He said he had heard clicking sounds during calls and believed someone was listening in. He reported it to the FBI, which investigated but found no evidence of a wiretap. The receiver believed a rival team was trying to gather information on the Packers' game plans, but he could never prove it. The incident was dismissed as paranoia, but the receiver maintained until his death that he had been spied on. The 2013 Baltimore Ravens were accused of faking injuries to slow down opposing offenses. Several teams complained that Ravens players would go down with injuries at convenient times, forcing the offense to stop and giving the defense time to rest. The league reviewed footage and found some instances where players appeared to be faking, but they took no disciplinary action. The Ravens denied the accusations, but the practice of faking injuries remains a controversial tactic in the NFL. In 1996, a New York Jets assistant coach was caught trying to videotape a Miami Dolphins practice from a nearby building. He was arrested for trespassing, and the Jets were fined by the league. The coach claimed he was just trying to get a better view, but the Dolphins believed he was spying. The incident embarrassed the Jets organization, and the coach was fired. But some within the Jets believed the practice of spying on opponents was more widespread than anyone wanted to admit. The 2007 Indianapolis Colts were accused of pumping an artificial noise during home games at the RCA Dome. Visiting teams complained that the noise levels were impossibly loud, making it difficult for their offenses to function. The league investigated but found no evidence of artificial noise being pumped in. However, they did find that the stadium's design naturally amplified crowd noise in ways that gave the Colts a significant home field advantage. Some teams believed the Colts had deliberately designed the stadium that way, which, while legal, felt like cheating. The controversy died down after the Colts moved to Lucas Oil Stadium, but visiting teams never forgot how difficult it was to play at the RCA Dome. In 1985, a San Francisco 49ers team doctor reported that vials of performance-enhancing substances had disappeared from the team's medical facility. The doctor couldn't say for certain what had been taken, only that the inventory didn't match his records. An internal investigation was launched, but nothing conclusive was found. The 49ers went on to win the Super Bowl that season, and rumors circulated that some players had been using PEDs. But without evidence, the allegations remained just rumors. Years later, former players admitted that steroid use was rampant in the 1980s across the entire league, but the 49ers' missing vials were never explained. The 1998 Minnesota Vikings had one of the greatest offenses in NFL history, but their season ended in heartbreak with a missed field goal in the NFC Championship game. What's not widely known is that kicker Gary Anderson claimed after the game that someone had tampered with his kicking shoe. He said the shoe felt different, and when he examined it later, he found that the laces had been replaced with slightly longer ones, changing the fit. Anderson never made a public issue of it, but he mentioned it to teammates, and some believed it was sabotage. The league was never notified, and Anderson retired a few years later without ever addressing the incident publicly. In 2001, a Seattle Seahawks security guard reported seeing someone climb over a fence at the team's practice facility late at night. The guard confronted the person, who claimed to be a lost fan, but the guard noticed the person was carrying a video camera. Security escorted the individual off the property, but they never got his name or identification. The next day, the Seahawks played a division rival, and their opponent's defense seemed unusually prepared. The Seahawks suspected their practice had been recorded, but without the camera or the person's identity, they couldn't prove it. Security at the practice facility was increased, but the incident was never solved. The 2005 Pittsburgh Steelers won Super Bowl 40 in one of the most controversial games in NFL history. Several calls went in the Steelers' favor, leading Seattle Seahawks fans to believe the game was rigged. Years later, one of the referees from that game admitted in an interview that he had made mistakes and that some calls should have gone the other way. The admission reignited the controversy, but the NFL stood by the result. Some believe the league wanted the Steelers to win because it was a better storyline. while others think the referee was simply incompetent. Either way, the game remains one of the most disputed Super Bowls ever played. In 1993, a Dallas Cowboys cheerleader reported that someone had been following her and taking photos without her consent. She filed a police report, but the stalker was never caught. Other cheerleaders came forward with similar stories, and the Cowboys hired additional security. Some believed the stalker was a fan, while others thought it might be someone connected to the organization. The case went cold, and the cheerleader eventually left the squad. But the incident raised serious questions about the safety and security of NFL cheerleaders. The 2008 Detroit Lions became the first team in NFL history to go 0-16, and conspiracy theories abounded. Some fans believed the team was deliberately tanking to secure the #1 draft pick. Others thought ownership was sabotaging the team to justify moving the franchise. The most bizarre theory claimed that the league was punishing Detroit for some unknown transgression by ensuring they lost every game. Of course, there was no evidence for any of these theories, and the Lions' winless season was simply the result of a terrible roster and poor coaching. But in a city as tortured as Detroit, conspiracy theories were easier to accept than reality. In 1980, a Houston Oilers quarterback claimed he received a death threat before a playoff game. The threat came in the form of a letter mailed to the team facility warning him that if he played, something bad would happen. The FBI investigated but never found the sender. The quarterback played anyway with extra security around him, and the Oilers won. Nothing happened, and the threat was dismissed as a prank. But the quarterback said years later that he had been genuinely terrified and considered sitting out the game. The 2012 San Francisco 49ers were involved in a strange incident during a playoff game when the lights went out in the Superdome for 34 minutes. The 49ers had been trailing badly before the outage, but after play resumed, they mounted a furious comeback that nearly resulted in a victory. Some conspiracy theorists believe the 49ers had orchestrated the blackout to disrupt the Ravens' momentum. Others thought it was a planned event by the stadium to create drama. The official explanation was an electrical relay device failure. But many fans refused to believe such a convenient malfunction was accidental. In 1991, a Philadelphia Eagles linebacker claimed he had been poisoned before a playoff game. He said he felt violently ill during warm-ups and couldn't play at full strength. After the game, which the Eagles lost, he was hospitalized, and doctors found traces of a substance in his system that shouldn't have been there. An investigation was launched, but the source of the substance was never identified. The linebacker believed someone had spiked his food or drink, but with no evidence, the case went nowhere. He returned the following season, but was never the same player. The 2016 Oakland Raiders were accused of violating the NFL's injury report rules by not disclosing the full extent of quarterback Derek Carr's injury. Carr broke his leg late in the season, but the team listed him as questionable for the playoffs, leading many to believe he might play. Some teams that were preparing to face the Raiders wasted time game planning for Carr, only to find out he was never going to play. The league investigated and fined the Raiders, but some believed the team had deliberately misled opponents to gain a competitive advantage. In 1986, a New York Giants defensive coordinator was accused of stealing signals from the Washington Redskins. The accusation came after the Giants' defense seemed to know exactly what plays the Redskins were running. The Giants denied it, but Redskins coaches were convinced their signals had been compromised. They changed their entire system for the next matchup, and the game was much closer. But the Giants still won, fueling suspicions that they had found a new way to decode the signals. The 2003 Carolina Panthers made an improbable run to the Super Bowl, but their success was marred by allegations of steroid use. Several players on the team were later linked to a performance-enhancing drug scandal, and some believe the Panthers' championship run was aided by PEDs. The league investigated, but found no evidence of widespread use during that season. However, The allegations cast a shadow over one of the most surprising playoff runs in recent memory. In 1994, a Miami Dolphins punter claimed someone had deflated the footballs he was using during a game. He said the balls felt different and his punts weren't traveling as far as they should. After the game, equipment staff tested the balls and found some were slightly underinflated. The league dismissed it as a mistake by the equipment crew, but the punter believed it was intentional sabotage. The incident predated Deflategate by 2 decades, but it showed that concerns about ball tampering were nothing new. The 2011 Green Bay Packers were accused of faking injuries during a game against the Kansas City Chiefs. Chiefs coaches claimed Packers players were going down with mysterious injuries to slow down Kansas City's fast-paced offense. The league reviewed the footage, but found no evidence of faking. However, the accusation highlighted a growing problem in the NFL, as teams looked for any advantage they could get, even if it meant bending the rules on injury timeouts. In 1989, a Cleveland Browns wide receiver reported that someone had broken into his car and stolen his playbook. The theft occurred the night before a game against the Houston Oilers, and the receiver was convinced the Oilers were behind it. The Browns changed their play calls for the game, but they still lost. The playbook was never recovered, and the thief was never caught. Browns coaches suspected corporate espionage, but they could never prove it. The 2014 New England Patriots faced accusations of filming opponents' practices, a charge that harked back to Spygate. This time, the Patriots were accused of sending a crew to film the Cincinnati Bengals practice under the guise of shooting a documentary. The Bengals filed a complaint with the league, and the NFL investigated. The Patriots claimed it was all a misunderstanding and that the crew had permission to be there. The league found no wrongdoing, but the incident reinforced the Patriots' reputation for pushing ethical boundaries. In 1982, a Washington Redskins running back claimed he had been offered money to fumble the ball during a playoff game. He said a man approached him in a parking lot and made the offer, but he immediately reported it to team officials. The FBI investigated, but the man was never identified. The running back played in the game and didn't fumble, and the Redskins won. But the incident was a stark reminder of the constant threat of gambling corruption in professional sports. The 2009 New Orleans Saints won the Super Bowl in one of the most beloved championship runs in NFL history. But years later, the Bountygate scandal revealed that the Saints' defense had been operating a bounty system, paying players to injure opponents. The revelation tarnished the Saints' championship and raised questions about whether their Super Bowl victory was legitimate. Some fans argue that bounty systems were common across the league and that the Saints were unfairly singled out. Others believe the Saints cheated their way to a championship, and the debate continues to this day. In 1995, a Tampa Bay Buccaneers assistant coach was caught trying to bribe a security guard at the opposing team's stadium. The coach reportedly offered the guard money in exchange for information about the field conditions and any last-minute changes to the stadium's setup. The guard reported the bribe attempt, and the coach was fired. The Buccaneers denied any knowledge of the incident, claiming the coach was acting alone. But the story embarrassed the organization and reinforced the perception that some teams would do anything to win. The 2006 Seattle Seahawks were involved in a strange incident when their team bus was delayed for hours on the way to a game. The bus broke down on the highway, and the team had to wait for a replacement. By the time they arrived at the stadium, they had less than an hour before kickoff. The Seahawks lost the game, and some players believed the breakdown was sabotage. Mechanics who examined the bus later said it appeared to be mechanical failure, but the timing was suspicious. The Seahawks never pursued the matter further, but the incident became part of team lore. In 1990, a Chicago Bears quarterback claimed he had been offered a bribe to throw a game. He said a man approached him at a restaurant and offered him $100,000 to play poorly in an upcoming game. The quarterback immediately reported it to the league, and the FBI launched an investigation. The man was never identified, and the quarterback played in the game, leading the Bears to victory. But the incident highlighted the ever-present danger of gambling corruption, even at the highest levels of professional football. The 2015 New England Patriots were at the center of Deflategate, one of the biggest scandals in NFL history. The Patriots were accused of deliberately deflating footballs during the AFC Championship game to make them easier to grip. The scandal led to a months-long investigation, culminating in a 4-game suspension for quarterback Tom Brady and significant fines for the team. The Patriots maintained their innocence, claiming the deflation was caused by weather conditions and natural air pressure changes. But the league didn't buy it, and the controversy divided the football world. Some believed the Patriots were cheaters who had been getting away with it for years. Others thought the league had overreacted and was punishing the Patriots for being too successful. Either way, Deflategate became a defining moment in Patriots history and a black mark on one of the greatest dynasties in sports. In 1987, a Denver Broncos linebacker reported that someone had been leaving threatening notes in his locker. The notes warned him to play poorly or face consequences. He reported the notes to team security, but they were dismissed as pranks. The linebacker continued to find the notes throughout the season, and he became increasingly paranoid. He eventually went to the police, who investigated but found no leads. The notes stopped after the season ended, and the person responsible was never caught. The linebacker retired a few years later, and he said in interviews that the experience had deeply affected him. The 2010 New York Jets were accused of filming the Miami Dolphins practice from a nearby hotel room. The Dolphins filed a complaint with the league, claiming they had seen someone in a hotel window with a video camera pointed at their practice field. The league investigated but found no evidence of filming. The Jets denied the accusation, and the matter was dropped. But Dolphins coaches remained convinced they had been spied on, and tensions between the two teams ran high for the rest of the season. In 1992, a Los Angeles Raiders equipment manager reported that several players' helmets had been tampered with before a game. The face masks had been loosened, which could have caused serious injuries. The tampering was discovered during a pre-game equipment check, and the helmets were repaired. An investigation was launched, but no one was ever charged. Raiders officials believed it was an inside job, possibly by a disgruntled employee, but they couldn't prove it. The incident led to increased security around the team's equipment. The 2013 Seattle Seahawks had one of the most dominant defenses in NFL history, but their success was clouded by allegations of widespread PED use. Several Seahawks players were suspended for violating the league's performance-enhancing drug policy, leading some to wonder if the entire defense was using banned substances. The Seahawks denied any systemic problem, claiming the suspensions were isolated incidents. But the allegations persisted, and some fans believed the Seahawks' Super Bowl victory was tainted by cheating. In 1988, a Green Bay Packers wide receiver claimed he had been drugged before a game. He said his drink had tasted strange, and during the game, he felt disoriented and sluggish. After the game, he was tested for drugs and alcohol, but the results came back negative. Doctors couldn't explain his symptoms, and the receiver believed he had been given a substance that wouldn't show up on standard tests. The league investigated, but found no evidence of foul play. The receiver played the rest of the season, but said he never felt quite right again. The 2004 Philadelphia Eagles were accused of faking injuries during the Super Bowl to slow down the New England Patriots offense. Patriots coaches claimed Eagles players were going down with convenient injuries at crucial moments, forcing the Patriots to stop their momentum. The league reviewed the footage but found no evidence of faking. However, the accusation became part of the narrative around the game, and some Patriots fans still believe the Eagles were trying to cheat. In 1993, a New York Giants defensive tackle reported that someone had been entering his home while he was at practice. He said items had been moved around, and he believed someone was searching for something. He installed security cameras and caught footage of an unknown person going through his belongings. The footage was turned over to police, but the person was never identified. The defensive tackle believed the intruder was looking for his playbook or other team-related materials, but nothing was ever taken. The break-in stopped after the cameras were installed, but the player never felt safe in that house again and moved shortly after. The 2008 Arizona Cardinals made an improbable Super Bowl run, but their success was overshadowed by allegations of performance-enhancing drug use. Several Cardinals players had previously been suspended for PED violations, and some wondered if the team's sudden improvement was chemically assisted. The league found no evidence of widespread use during that season, but the suspicions lingered. Cardinals fans were frustrated that their team's greatest season was being questioned, while critics argued that where there's smoke, there's fire. In 1991, a Seattle Seahawks cornerback claimed he had been approached by a gambler who wanted inside information about injuries and game plans. The cornerback reported the approach to the league, which launched an investigation. The gambler was never identified, and no charges were filed. But the incident was a reminder that gamblers were constantly looking for any edge they could get, and players were often targets. The league increased its education efforts around gambling, warning players about the dangers of getting involved with bookies and fixers. The 2012 Baltimore Ravens won the Super Bowl in Ray Lewis's final season, a storybook ending for one of the greatest linebackers in NFL history. But some fans questioned whether the league had favored the Ravens because of the Lewis narrative. Several controversial calls went Baltimore's way during the playoffs, and opposing teams felt they were getting the short end of the stick. The league denied any bias, but the perception remained that the Ravens had received preferential treatment. Whether true or not, the allegations cast a slight shadow over what should have been an unblemished championship. In 1986, a Tampa Bay Buccaneers quarterback reported that his car had been vandalized the night before a game. Someone had slashed his tires and spray-painted threats on the windshield. He reported it to police, who investigated but found no leads. The quarterback believed it was an attempt to intimidate him, possibly by fans of the opposing team. He borrowed a car and played in the game anyway, but the Buccaneers lost. The vandal was never caught, and the quarterback said years later that the incident had rattled him more than he let on at the time. The 2017 New England Patriots were accused of using illegal formations during the AFC Championship game. Jacksonville Jaguars coaches claimed the Patriots had lined up in ways that violated NFL rules, giving them an unfair advantage. The league reviewed the tape and found some questionable formations, but didn't issue any penalties. The Jaguars believed they had been cheated out of a Super Bowl appearance, while Patriots fans argued that the team was simply smarter than everyone else and knew how to exploit the rulebook. In 1994, a San Diego Chargers linebacker claimed he had been followed by a private investigator. He said a car had been tailing him for several days, and he believed someone was trying to gather information on him. He reported it to team security, who hired their own investigator to look into the matter. They discovered that the private investigator had been hired by an unknown client, but they couldn't determine who. The surveillance stopped after the Chargers investigator confronted the PI, but the linebacker never found out who had hired him or why. The 2011 Detroit Lions were involved in a controversial game against the Green Bay Packers that featured several questionable calls by the referees. Lions fans believed the league was favoring the Packers, who were in the middle of a historic undefeated season. After the game, which the Lions lost, head coach Jim Schwartz filed a formal complaint with the league. The NFL reviewed the game and admitted that some calls had been incorrect, but the results stood. Lions fans were furious, and the incident reinforced their belief that the league doesn't respect small market teams. In 1989, a Kansas City Chiefs offensive lineman reported that someone had been sending him bizarre letters. The letters contained cryptic messages and strange drawings, and the lineman believed they were threats. He turned them over to the FBI, which analyzed them but couldn't determine who had sent them. The letters stopped after a few weeks, and the case went cold. The lineman said in interviews that the experience had been unsettling, and he never found out what the letters meant or who had sent them. The 2007 San Diego Chargers had one of the most talented rosters in NFL history, but they failed to win the Super Bowl. Some believe the team was cursed, while others think they simply choked under pressure. But there's a lesser-known theory that the Chargers were sabotaged from within. Several players later admitted that there was significant infighting and jealousy on the team, and some believe that certain players were deliberately underperforming to make their teammates look bad. Whether true or not, the Chargers' failure to capitalize on their talent remains one of the great mysteries of the 2000s.